name's Adam Glenn. Just an average dude, pretty much. Was in the Army Rangers for some years. Developed the habit of reading in the Rangers deployment. It's a very aggressive mission schedule, marked with downtime, and as opposed to playing video games or doing whatnot, I got in the habit of reading. I like to read history. I'm out now. I'm out these days, and I continue my habit of reading. I still enjoy reading quite a bit of history, and I feel like I've probably read every Jefferson and Washington biography. Many more, of course, like all history, Caesar, and so on and so forth. But I've certainly read every Jefferson and Washington biography known to man, Barbary Wars, and so on. And I am 100% convinced that Tobias Lear poisoned General Washington. Now, Tobias Lear was his personal secretary, and there's some controversy around Lear. He went on to be Jefferson's personal secretary, and there's a lot of accusation and suspicion, well-founded suspicion, that on the bequest of Jefferson, he burned a lot of Washington's personal letters and papers for many political reasons, and some personal ones. Jefferson maybe didn't want to be cast in a negative light. Washington went through his seasons with many of our founding fathers, but many historians will pretty blatantly say, hey, it's just a suspicion, but we're pretty sure that Tobias Lear burned the absolute treasure trove of Washington's letters and documents at the request of Jefferson. That's probably the case. Tobias Lear is not a good person. He was caught stealing. He was caught thieving from Washington. Washington was using Lear to go around and essentially collect rent. And, as many landlords know, property managers like to steal. Tobias Lear liked to steal. Washington was a very fastidious person. He caught the error. He essentially knew what should have been. It shouldn't have been coming in, and he caught the error and went through the books and pretty much forced Tobias Lear to fess up to thieving from him, which he did. Washington, being the magnanimous man that he was, forgave him. Kind of almost get a hint of Caesar. Caesar's so eager to pardon his enemies, to take the high road, but a collective of his enemies ended up killing him. The better part of the 60 or so conspirators that stabbed Caesar were pardoned enemies of Caesar, and maybe history would have been different if Washington would have trusted his initial instinct and fired Lear. I think many of us, certainly many landlords, could tell you that once a thief, always a thief. But anyways, Tobias Lear stole from Washington, and Washington pardoned him. Anybody who's read anything of the Barbary Wars, just kind of the initial instinct is to fall in love with General Eaton, and just absolutely despise just the pettiness and the greed of Tobias Lear. Pretty much doing everything he could to stop Eaton, out of just personal spite that a man could be so bold or gain any manner of fame that occupied his prior position, and just even his personal dealings. He was working with the Shah of Tripoli, investing in grain shipments, and didn't want a naval blockade by the American fleet to possibly hurt his profits and possibly stop his grain shipment. He was just the most petty gain you could imagine. He's ceasing American policy for interfering in really what we perceive now as history, but interfering in American policy in a very, very negative way. If General Eaton would have been successful, we might not have the some of the issues we have in contemporary northern Africa. But the last person in Washington's final words were transmitted through Lear. Probably authentic, maybe not. Lear was a liar, and he was a scoundrel. I mean, he was called that many times by many people. But he ended up marrying a Washington niece. Maybe it was Fanny. One of them died, and he married another one. And being Washington's secretary, he dictated Washington's will. He had dictated to Washington's will, and he knew that he was going to inherit a modest property. Washington was he owned tremendous properties through himself and his wife, and he had many farms. He was a huge landlord of the day, and certainly more so even after the war. But he was going to bequest a modest-sized farm to Lear, and it would have meant a new start. Any sense of history, we can see that Lear has just no character whatsoever. And I feel certain that Lear, maybe using something on a handkerchief or something to cause Washington to inhale, maybe anthrax, caused Washington to inhale some kind of poison. It caused him to go into his initial sickness. We know Washington's a very tough dude. He went through quite a few tremendous sicknesses during the war, and to think a little cold would kill him at the end, it just seems unbelievable to any student of Washington. But certainly Lear poisoned him with some manner of liquid. Lear essentially attended him, and he was there at his last. And he kind of postured himself as this overtly loyal servant, friend of Washington, but he was nothing of the kind. He was an absolute scoundrel, and he was a murderer, and he was a man of just the most petty character one could imagine. And he later killed himself. maybe he was haunted by the demons of his ills, or he talked a lot about his physical pains he had, but I think it was in a good part of his conscience and just the forces that be in this metaphysical world that we live in catching up to Lear, and he ended up hanging himself later in life. But he was certainly an evil man, and Washington's practice of being just so generous and kind and forgiving, unfortunately, did him wrong, just as Caesar's did. And when Lear stole the first time, and it certainly wasn't his first character failing. But when Lear stole from Washington the first time, he should have canned him, because I promise you, Tobias Lear poisoned General Washington for the utmost petty gain.